under contract to the Miami-Dade Expressway Authority. I'm here to give a really brief presentation on the US 1 Express Lanes project. This open house, this workshop is really intended as an opportunity to allow you to get up close to our plans, concepts that we're developing, and then to ask questions about it. Some people like this project, some people don't like this project, and some people aren't sure yet, but we want you to make that decision in an informed way. So that's the reason this meeting is taking place. This is not a public hearing. It's not really the opportunity to make statements. If you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Before I proceed, I want to welcome Alex Garcia from Representative Beleca's office. I also want to welcome Brittany Basant from Commissioner Bell's office. If there are any other elected officials or representatives in the room. Thank you for being here. Thank everyone who has attended today. Thank you for sharing your time with us. What I'd like to go through in really the briefest amount of time is a little bit of the background of this project. This is a project that, frankly, has been around for a good many years, and so there's a lot of history that I think you need to be aware of. We've conducted this project in two parts: a Tier 1, where we began to develop ideas, and a Tier 2, where we've formulated those ideas a lot more specifically. There will be a lot of steps following what we're showing you tonight, so you'll have a lot of questions about the specific impacts, and we will be studying that and won't necessarily have answers for you. So let's take a little look at where this project has come from, because it has had a history that I would say goes back 15 to 20 years. And I would take it all the way back to the People's Transportation Plan that looked at the idea of 8 metro rail corridors around Miami-Dade County, and the US 1 busway was really the south corridor. 20-mile metro rail running all the way from Dadeland to Florida City. You're aware of the financial issues that have taken place around metro rail funding, Miami-Dade Transit, and so the consideration was what else could we do in that corridor. And the South Lake study, which was run by the Miami-Dade Metropolitan Planning Organization, looked at possibilities for the full range of transit: metro rail, light rail, bus rapid transit, and really everything in between. The conclusion of that study was metro rail made sense to extend all the way down to 104th Street, but that south of 104th, bus rapid transit was really the right answer. Bus rapid transit in this case means building overpasses over 10 cross streets, the most heavily congested cross streets, so that buses could pass over the cross street and move more quickly through the corridor. That was the conclusion of the South Lake study. Money was still an issue, and the managed lane, South Miami-Dade managed lane study was conducted also by the MPO, finished about 5 years ago, to look at whether managed lanes made sense. And I'll use the term managed lanes and express lanes interchangeably, but essentially what we're talking about is a tolled road where the toll varies to control the amount of traffic. The more people who want to use it, the higher it has to be, because if the traffic gets too heavy, then traffic doesn't move and you'll have just more of US 1. So this is a road that would always move at the posted speed, free flow traffic, and the managed lane study said, yes, there is something in here, it's worth studying further. Based on that conclusion, the Metropolitan Planning Organization turned to MDX and said, we'd like you to study in a project development and environment study, a PD&E study, the feasibility of these managed lanes in a whole lot more detail. And you'll see some drawings around the room that are indeed increased detail. The concept is to study managed lanes over the full 20 miles of the busway from Florida City all the way to Dadeland, to evaluate the engineering and cost feasibility, and to establish what sort of impacts, positive and negative, might be on the community and the natural environment. And ultimately, to make a recommendation to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, to the MPO. That's their decision. Our job is to give them the information so that they can make an informed decision. And your job as citizens here is to give them your opinions, your preferences, and let them be aware of the issues that surround your neighborhood so that they can make an informed decision. The principle we're looking at is allowing mixed-use traffic, general traffic, in exchange for toll to be able to operate on additional roadway within the busway corridor. The busway is about 100 feet wide, and all of this project needs to fit within that 100 feet. The idea is to create an additional option for traffic. Everything that exists today, US 1, as congested as it may be, is toll-free and would continue to be toll-free. The buses 6 routes operating along the busway would continue to be able to operate along the busway. And for the $2 fare or so, you could travel along the busway as you do today. The Greenway, which allows people to cycle and walk, the full 20-mile corridor, would be maintained. We would expect enhancements to transit. The infrastructure that we're proposing here would allow buses to move more quickly, to move more reliably. Whatever we do here, we have to preserve the possibility of Metro Rail in the future. So these concepts allow Metro Rail to be built on top of whatever might occur here. The bike path is maintained, transit operates toll-free. I mentioned that traffic would pay a toll to travel, transit vehicles would not. US 1, again, toll-free as it is today. Because of the variables and the range of things that needed to be considered, we took this project in 2 steps. The first step, our Tier 1, was to say, let's look at the full range of possibilities. What could we do here? And we narrowed that down to more manageable, more practical solutions, and then looked at them in more detail in Tier 2. That's where we are today. What we concluded in our first tier of analysis is this. The busway is 20 miles, but traffic congestion is not expected to be at levels south of 232nd Street that people would be willing to pay any kind of a toll to avoid the traffic on US 1. You also have the turnpike running virtually in parallel, so any managed lane proposal we're looking at stops at 232nd. We determined that you would need no more than 2 lanes of traffic in the peak direction, the peak hour, and that in fact it would be very difficult if there were more lanes to connect on the northern end or on the southern end. So 2 lanes in the peak direction, perhaps a lane in the off-peak direction certainly would be benefit to buses, and that would be the configuration. We looked at the ability to get people through quickly 40, 45 miles an hour, and determined that if every intersection were not grade separated, either the managed lanes going above or below the cross street, but you simply wouldn't get much benefit, wouldn't pay a toll, wouldn't really solve the problem. This is intended to be an express lane for longer distance travel. 95 Express, you travel 8 miles with no intermediate access. But we identified 4 places along the way, obviously the north end and the south end, 141st Street, 170th, 211th, 216th, around there, as candidate locations where cars could get on and off, but buses, of course, could get on throughout. And then finally, we needed to establish some range for the tolls. This is a very preliminary estimate, just to give us an idea of what revenues might be to see if this project was even financially in the ballpark. Testing different numbers, we found an upper level of about 80 cents a mile. So traveling from 232nd Street all the way up to Dadeland would be about a $10 trip. That's a big number. I'm amazed by it, but then I'm amazed that people pay $7 on 95 Express. Routinely, every day, 5:30, I see the sign, and that's what it's saying. In the off-peak and in the off-peak direction, 10 cents. So that was a starting number. It's only a starting number, and we'll be doing a lot more analysis to see if this is really going to pan out as it does. Because as you know, tolls on 95 Express vary every 15 minutes. And while I see $7 at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, I certainly don't see $7 at 8 o'clock. I've mentioned the benefits to the automobile user, to the toll payer, but there's also a transit component to this. Transit would continue to have a 20-mile busway. The bus lanes would allow buses to continue unimpeded as they do today. They would have the intersections to contend with, but could travel on the managed lanes and cross over those intersections if they were operating in an express mode. 2 lanes in the peak direction made sense. The buses would have 1 lane in each direction regardless of what the automobiles had. Buses would operate at the same speeds they do today if they use the bus lanes. That's about 17 or 18 miles an hour. But if they use the express lanes, you could see an appreciable savings so that a bus starting at 232nd could travel all the way to Dadeland, and you could make that trip in a fraction of the time that you do today. Buses would travel toll-free, so there'd be no toll for buses as there would be for automobiles. When we get to the Tier 2, those were the basic limits to what we were considering. We began to drill down a little bit further. So we looked at lots of possibilities. I said 2 lanes in the peak direction. Do we allow the cars and the buses to mix? Do we keep the cars and the buses separate? Do we have the cars on the inside and the buses on the outside, the buses on the inside and the cars on the outside? We looked at every possibility that I can think of. If we've missed one, please write it down. We'd appreciate it. We'll take a second look. We concluded that the best idea was to put the cars on the inside, the buses on the outside, and that would allow buses to be able to move into those express lanes if that was the operating plan that they were going to follow. We looked at how the managed lanes would cross the local streets. We looked at the managed lanes being up in the air, we looked at them in a tunnel, we looked at them in a depressed section, we looked at the possibility of the cross street being over or under, and concluded ultimately the best idea, the one that would have the least impact on the community, would be to keep the bus lanes in the air as they cross over the cross streets. And if you wanted more detail on that, talk to the engineers about the complexities of having the cross street cross over the managed lanes. Over the course of doing this study, we've heard a lot about the idea that we're proposing cloverleaf interchanges, and of course that's not true. We looked at a lot of different configurations. Here are a variety of them, and ultimately concluded the best alternative was a diamond interchange, a very tight diamond interchange. So lanes on either side of the express lanes rise up so that you can get on or get off, and on the other side the same thing. All essentially fitting within the 100-foot right-of-way. There's a sketch of that back here. At each of the proposed locations, you can see a sketch if you're interested in what it looks like at 141st or 170th. I believe at 170th, the width is a little bit beyond the 100 feet, but generally speaking, the other locations were all within the right-of-way. We also looked at the feasibility of connecting with the turnpike. We looked at whether all movements would be permitted or some movements or no movements. Over the course of this study, the turnpike has advanced their own managed lane project. They've taken the entire right-of-way for those managed lanes, which makes it very costly, very difficult to connect the express lanes with the managed lanes on the turnpike, or the proposed managed lanes on the turnpike. But we also looked at the demand. What would be the likelihood of people wanting to make that interchange? And we found it to be pretty small. So given that it was very expensive to build and wouldn't serve many people, we eliminated that idea. And that's why we have an interchange proposed in the vicinity of 211th, or terminating the express lanes in the vicinity of 216th. It allows some movement between the two roadways. 2 lanes in the center with bus lanes on the outside, or 3 lanes, 1 or 2 of those lanes being reversible. The managed lanes traveling over the local cross streets. Tight diamond interchanges to minimize impacts and allow people to go northbound or southbound, or exit northbound or southbound, and no interchange at the turnpike. Those are the basic parameters we work with as we advance the Tier 2 alternatives. We came up with 3 different concepts that work with these parts to come up with slightly different variation. The first alternative starts at 232nd, ending at the Palmetto and US 1 in the vicinity of 95th Street in the north. 3 lanes for general purpose traffic, 2 inbound in the morning, outbound 2 in the evening, and the other lane the reverse. Bus lanes on the outside so the buses could operate just as they do today. And we looked at 3 intermediate access points, 141st Street, 170th Street, and we initially said 211th, and as you look at those plans, you'll see it's kind of slid down to about 214th. Those are the intermediate access points under that alternative. Under the second alternative, we looked at 3 lanes, but only north of 170th. Less demand for traffic further south, so only 2 lanes south of 170th. So that what you've got is 2 lanes northbound and 1 lane southbound in the morning, but only up to 170th. Access points at 141st and 170th, plus the north and south end. And then alternative 3, which is really the lowest cost of these 3 alternatives, is 2 lanes, inbound in the morning, outbound in the evening. On a weekend, I suppose you could have 1 lane in each direction, and only 1 intermediate access point in the vicinity of 141st Street. Again, bus lanes on the outside, so buses can continue to operate as they do today. All of these alternatives propose variably priced tolls to control traffic. There would be overpasses at all of the intersections, and I think there are 22 intersections between 232nd and the northern end of the project. Every one of those streets would be crossed with an overpass. It might be 1 overpass crossing more than 1 street, where the streets are further apart, separate overpasses. Trucks would not be permitted on the managed lanes. And here in Florida, we generally define trucks as having more than 2 axles. So a pickup truck, a FedEx truck, the mailman, will of course be able to use the express lanes. Tractor trailers, large delivery vehicles would not. Transit would continue to operate toll-free, whether they ride on bus lanes on the outside or take the express lanes on the inside. And we would expect enhancements to transit, if nothing else, the replacement of all of the bus shelters that would have to be relocated. But you'd also have a lot of opportunity to improve metro operations. Metro bus operations could move more quickly through the corridor. We see an appreciable benefit because almost everybody boarding buses along the busway is going all the way to Dadeland. And to have to get on at 168 and make 15 stops makes your trip a lot longer and a lot less reliable. There is an alternative to all of this. These are the build alternatives, and in every PD&E study we look at, well, what if we did nothing, a no-build alternative? The no-build alternative is almost literally doing nothing. If you look at the long-range transportation plan for Miami-Dade County, you're not going to see a lot on it. There are no major improvements proposed other than that widening of the turnpike I talked about. But otherwise, the county and the state, in the normal course of doing things, make safety improvements and small spot improvements. So you could see a widening here or there, an intersection, a right turn lane or left turn lane constructed. I mentioned the turnpike being widened and managed lanes being put on that facility, so that is an improvement that you're going to see. Miami-Dade Transit has been conducting a program of improvements, Americans with Disabilities improvements, to improve pedestrian access to the bus stations. That will continue, and you can expect that Miami-Dade Transit will continue to modify and improve their bus service all the time to better serve customers. You'll see some very limited improvements because, frankly, their cash is tight, they've got a lot to keep running, and expansions are expensive. I think it's also important to recognize that there may be something out there that we're not thinking of. We've been charged with looking at express lanes. There may be some other ideas out there, and if you have them, that's great. We'd be happy to hear about them. We'll pass that on to the MPO and to the Commission. But if you're looking at Metro Rail as the solution, light rail as the solution, it's already been studied. I mentioned the Southlink study. And unless you think there's something materially different between now and when the Southlink study was finished 7 years ago, then we're going to come up with the same conclusion, and it is unlikely that the MPO or the Commission is going to say, let's study it again. But there may be something else out there, and we're happy to hear about it. Now, when we look at these alternatives, these three build alternatives in particular, and compare them with the no-build, we've come up with this preliminary matrix. There's a copy of it back here, and I'd be happy to go over it with you in detail as we wander around the room. The short version is this: the more you build, the more it costs. The less you build, the less it costs, both in terms of construction, operations, and maintenance. The more you build, the more the transportation improvements you will find. You will also find some increased adverse impacts, and the less you build, the fewer impacts. Of course, if you build nothing, you'll have no impact from the project. The traffic is still not going to get any better over the future. We've anticipated 5-mile-an-hour travel speeds on US 1 over a lot of the day. So that's the trade-off that we're looking at in this matrix. We've got a lot of exhibits around the room, as I said. The intent of a meeting like this is to show this material to you. We thought it was important to give you this brief presentation, not as brief as I would have liked, but this brief presentation, so that you could have a basic understanding and be informed and be able to ask the right questions. There's a location map here. The alternatives are shown in overview here. I talked about that tight diamond interchange, and we've got that back here. There's also been a lot of question, what does this overpass look like? And here's a possible version of what it might look like. There's a lot of detail here, so it's worth looking at. There's a summary of the alternatives and the evaluation. I'd also draw your attention to that map on the corner with all the colors. That's a possible transit operating plan, and shows how transit could really benefit from the managed lanes. This is not purely a highway project. Along the side of the room, you see 3 rows of drawings. They may look like engineering drawings, like we've got finished plans. They are not. They are conceptual plans, and no one would even attempt to build anything from this. But we needed to define the project well enough so that when you say, how far is this from my backyard, we at least have a good idea from these drawings. There's a lot more work to be done to develop it, but based on this, we can then do cost estimates. We can evaluate the impacts to the community, to the natural and man-made environment. We will also have set up here a demonstration of noise analysis. There's a lot of talk about all this traffic is going to bring noise to my community. This will help you to understand so that when the noise analysis is done, and we say there's an increase of 3 decibels, you can say 3 decibels, is that a lot or a little? This will allow you to understand that and put it in perspective. So it'll be an ongoing exhibit. Please come up here and we'll be demonstrating that to you. As I said, this is not the end of this project. We've got nearly another 2 years to go. We still have to develop these plans. We have to come up with a good cost estimate. We've got to evaluate the traffic and transit benefits. A lot of people have expressed concern about where all this traffic is going to go when it hits the north end of the project. I don't have the answer yet, but before I can make a recommendation, we have to have an answer. We also want to know exactly what this is going to do to transit, because if we can't improve transit with this project, there's a question mark there too. We have to evaluate the environmental impacts, and ultimately, we want to determine what the revenues might be. I've talked about toll rates. Will people pay those tolls? And how many people will pay, so that we can compare the costs and the revenues and see if this is financially feasible. Finances are not the only decision maker, but if the project can't fund most of itself, I think we're going to find ourselves in the same situation we have with previous studies that said there's just no money to build this, so we'll have to find that out. We'll be continuing, as I said, for about another 2 years. There will be a public hearing next summer, and that's really the opportunity, after we've developed this in sufficient detail, to come out with the information for you to make a statement, to put on the record so that our elected officials can make a decision based on the information we supply and the comments that you offer. All of those analyses that I talked about will be going on over the next several months, so that by the time we get to that public hearing, the information will be available to you. We have a project steering committee made up of a number of federal, state, and local officials who are helping guide this project. We have a citizens advisory committee. Your neighbors have been advising us along the way. And when I say advising us, they don't necessarily like this project, but they're willing to give us advice to come up with the best project we can, so that if we decide it's a bad idea, somebody won't come around tomorrow morning and say, but if you had only done this, it would be better. Public hearing, and that's really the big opportunity for statements. You can contact us through our website, and ultimately all of this material will be available on the website. You can also contact us by email or by telephone, and we'll supply whatever information we can and answer questions. We are constantly receiving comments, questions, and we're constantly responding. We appreciate that. We want you to know what this project is about. At this point, we're going to turn the room back over to our open house format. Before you ask you a quick question, let me introduce quick questions. If there is a question that anybody has that is of general interest, if I haven't covered it, if I wasn't clear, I'd be happy to answer that. If you wish to if you have a specific comment, we have comment cards. You all were given one when you come in. That's the best way. My memory isn't what it used to, and if you tell me something, it's going to be hard. It's much better if you write it down. If you want to make a statement, again, this really isn't the place for it. We're here to discuss the specifics and the details. If you want to make a statement and you can't contain yourself, 2 or 3 minutes, please, and then we'll move on. With that, I will open the floor to any questions of a general interest, and you are